The ambulance screamed through Boston's icy streets, but it was already too late. Inside Whitfield Manor, a billionaire CEO watched his world crumble as his newborn twins stopped breathing. The hospital was 20 minutes away through the blizzard. The babies had seconds, not minutes. Then Rosa, the quiet housekeeper everyone overlooked, stepped forward with steady hands and a secret past. What she did next defied every expectation, and what she discovered while saving those lives would shatter everything the Whitfield family thought they knew about themselves. Could the woman who scrubbed their floors hold the key to their survival and their darkest family secret? Drop your city in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Let's dive into the story. The crystal chandeliers of Whitfield Manor blazed against the February darkness, but their light couldn't penetrate the shadow falling over Marcus Whitfield's life. He stood in the marble foyer, his Armani suit soaked with melted snow, phone trembling in his hand as the hospital's words echoed in his skull. "Mr. Whitfield, your wife didn't survive the delivery. The twins are in critical condition. You need to come immediately. 38 years old, worth $2 billion, and Marcus Whitfield was completely powerless. His wife Victoria, vibrant, laughing Victoria who danced in this very foyer just yesterday, was gone. And their premature twins, born at 32 weeks, were fighting for every breath. Sir?" Rosa Martinez appeared from the kitchen, her weathered hands clutching a dish towel, dark eyes filled with concern. She'd worked in this mansion for 19 years, so much a part of the furniture that Marcus barely registered her presence most days. "Sir, what's happened?" "Victoria's dead." The words fell from his lips like stones into a frozen pond. "The babies, they're not going to make it. I have to—" His voice cracked. "I have to go to Mass General, but the storm—" Outside, the blizzard had intensified. Already, 8 inches blanketed the ground, and the meteorologists were calling it the worst storm in 30 years. The hospital was across town, a journey that would take 40 minutes in these conditions, maybe more. "You should call your driver," Rosa said quietly, already moving toward the phone. Marcus nodded numbly, but before he could speak, his cell rang again. The hospital. His hand shook so badly he almost dropped the phone. "Mr. Whitfield, we have a situation." Dr. Patel's voice carried a new urgency. "The twins are crashing, both of them. We need to intubate immediately, but—" Static crackled across the line. "Losing power. Backup generators." "What? Doctor! The line went dead. Marcus stared at the silent phone, his billion-dollar empire meaningless in this moment. He couldn't save his own children. He couldn't even reach them. "Mr. Whitfield." Rosa's voice cut through his paralysis. "The ambulance." "What? When Mrs. Victoria went into early labor. You called 911. Where is the ambulance?" Marcus's mind struggled to process. It was coming here, but the dispatcher said they'd rerouted it to a multi-car pileup on Route 93. They said to drive her ourselves, but by then, he couldn't finish. By then, Victoria had insisted they call their private car service, refusing to wait. That decision had cost precious minutes. Minutes that might have saved her life. Thunder cracked overhead. Impossible thunder during a snowstorm. The lights flickered. Rosa moved to the window, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "The roads are impassable now, Mr. Whitfield. Even if you left this second, you wouldn't reach the hospital for an hour." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Marcus roared, hurling his phone across the foyer. It shattered against the marble fireplace, expensive fragments scattering like his composure. "My children are dying, and I'm trapped here like some useless—" "Listen to me." Rosa turned from the window, and something in her voice made Marcus freeze. Her spine had straightened, her shoulders squared, and the uncertain housekeeper had vanished, replaced by someone else entirely, someone commanding. "How long ago did the hospital call?" 5 minutes, maybe less. Why does that— "Mr. Whitfield, I need you to think very carefully. The power is failing at the hospital. The twins are in distress. If the backup generators can't maintain the NICU equipment—" She paused, her dark eyes calculating something Marcus couldn't fathom. "They'll be sending them out." "Sending them where?" "There's nowhere. Home." Rosa grabbed her coat from the closet, her movement swift and purposeful. "They'll stabilize them as much as possible and send them by ambulance to the nearest safe location with power. That's here, Mr. Whitfield. They'll be bringing your babies here." Marcus felt the world tilt. "Here? But we don't have equipment. We don't have—" "You have me." The simple statement hung in the air between them. Marcus stared at this woman he'd barely noticed for nearly 2 decades, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. Rosa Martinez stood barely 5 feet tall, with gray threading through her black hair, worn hands, and a quiet dignity he'd never appreciated. What could she possibly? Headlights pierced the storm outside. An ambulance, fighting through the mounting snowdrifts, its red and blue lights painting the white landscape in urgent colors. Rosa was already at the door. Clear the dining room table. I need all the clean towels from the upstairs linen closet. Bring every space heater in the house. And Mr. Whitfield, she looked back at him, her face carved from stone and determination. Whatever happens in the next hour, you need to trust me completely. Can you do that? Marcus nodded, not because he understood, but because he had no other choice. The ambulance pulled into the circular drive and 2 paramedics burst out, carrying tiny bundles. Rosa threw open the door, and the howling wind invaded the mansion's warmth, bringing with it the most fragile sound Marcus had ever heard, the thin, desperate crying of newborns fighting to live. But what Rosa did next, what she revealed about herself in the hours that followed, would prove more shocking than anything Marcus could have imagined. The secret she'd kept for 19 years was about to emerge, and with it, a truth that would shake the Whitfield family to its foundation. Aro 2. Set them here, now! Rosa commanded, sweeping crystal vases and silk table runners aside with no regard for their expense. The paramedics, young men Marcus didn't recognize, placed 2 portable incubators on the antique mahogany dining table, their faces tight with worry. "Ma'am, we can't stay," the taller one said, already backing toward the door. "We have 3 more critical calls and the hospital's being evacuated. We gave them oxygen, but..." He gestured helplessly at the tiny forms inside the plastic bubbles. "They need NICU care. We're supposed to transport them to Children's Hospital across town, but the roads..." "Go." Rosa had her hands on the incubators, her eyes tracking readings that meant nothing to Marcus. "How long on the oxygen?" 15 minutes, maybe 20 if you're conservative, but without proper..." "I said go." The paramedics fled into the storm. Rosa's fingers were already working the latches on the first incubator. "Mr. Whitfield, those towels, and I need you to call your private physician. Tell him to get here however he can. Helicopter, snowmobile, I don't care. Tell him we have respiratory distress in 32-week-old twins. APGAR scores unknown, maternal death, possible hypothermia." Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the clinical precision in Rosa's voice. "How do you know?" "The towels!" Rosa snapped, and Marcus ran. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his $1,000 shoes slipping on the marble. Behind him, he heard Rosa murmuring in Spanish, her voice steady and low. He grabbed armfuls of towels from the upstairs closet, his hands shaking so badly he dropped half of them. When he returned, Rosa had both incubators open. The babies, his babies, lay on the dining table, each smaller than his forearm, their skin alarmingly translucent under the chandelier's light. Their tiny chests rose and fell with frightening irregularity, and their faces, wrinkled and red, contorted with each struggling breath. "Marcus." Rosa's use of his first name shocked him into focus. "Your son, the boy is on the left. His respiratory rate is dropping. I need to stimulate him. Watch me carefully because you may need to do the same for your daughter." She lifted the baby boy with a confidence that belied his fragility, supporting his oversized head with one hand, while her other hand worked his tiny back in firm, rhythmic motions. "Come on, pequeño," she whispered. "Breathe for me. That's it. Good boy." The baby's color shifted from grayish blue to pink. His breathing steadied, becoming more regular. Rosa laid him back down on a nest of heated towels, then turned to the girl. "The girl is stronger," she murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. "But she's fighting the oxygen flow." Classic preemie response. Her hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the tiny oxygen mask, tilting the baby's head at a specific angle that immediately eased her breathing. Marcus stood transfixed. This was Rosa. Rosa, who brought him coffee every morning, who quietly cleaned around him during his late-night work sessions, who'd never spoken more than a dozen words to him in a day. Rosa, who was now performing medical procedures with the expertise of a trained professional. "You're a nurse," he said, the realization dawning. Was. Rosa's hands never stopped moving, checking the baby's color, their breathing, the warmth of their skin. 27 years ago, in Guadalajara, I was head nurse in the NICU at Hospital Civil, before I came to America, before I became your housekeeper. "Why didn't you?" Marcus couldn't finish the question. "Why didn't you tell us?" But he knew the answer. Why would she? He'd never asked. In 19 years, he'd never asked Rosa Martinez anything about her life beyond whether the windows were clean or if she'd restocked the wine cellar. "Your daughter?" Rosa said quietly. "Come here." Marcus approached the table with trembling legs. His daughter, they'd planned to name her Emma, lay perfectly still, her breathing too shallow, her lips tinged with blue despite the oxygen. "She's not getting enough," Rosa said, her voice tight. "The portable oxygen is failing. We need to buy time until your doctor arrives. Have you called him?" Marcus grabbed his shattered phone from across the room, realized its uselessness, and found the house phone in the kitchen. His fingers fumbled with the numbers as he called Dr. Bernard Chen, the family physician who'd cared for Victoria throughout her pregnancy. "Marcus? The hospital just called me about Victoria. I'm so sorry. The twins are here, at the house. They're dying, Bernard. Rosa says respiratory distress. We need help now." A long pause. "Rosa? Your housekeeper, Rosa. She says she was a NICU nurse." "Bernard? She's doing things I don't understand, but the babies are still breathing. Can you get here?" "I'm at Mass General. The storm has shut down everything, Marcus. I can't—" He heard Bernard shouting at someone. "Wait, there's a National Guard unit with snow vehicles evacuating patients. Let me see if— Marcus, I'll be there as fast as I can. 45 minutes, maybe an hour. Can Rosa keep them stable that long?" Marcus looked through the doorway at the tiny woman bent over his children, her lips moving in silent prayer or instruction, her hands steady as stone. "I don't know," he whispered. He returned to find Rosa holding Emma against her chest, the baby's ear pressed to her heart. "Skin to skin," Rosa explained. "Kangaroo care. It's primitive, but it works. Her breathing is too irregular for me to risk anything else." "What can I do?" Marcus asked, feeling utterly helpless in his own home. "Take your son." Rosa carefully transferred Emma to a nest of towels beneath a space heater Marcus had dragged in. "Hold him like this, yes, against your bare skin. Unbutton your shirt. He needs to hear your heartbeat, feel your warmth. Talk to him. Let him know his father is here." Marcus fumbled with his shirt buttons, his hands clumsy with fear. Rosa lifted the impossibly tiny boy, his son, and placed him against Marcus's chest. The baby weighed nothing, less than a bag of sugar, but the warmth of him, the fragile rise and fall of his breathing against Marcus's skin, was the most profound thing he'd ever experienced. "I've got you," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I've got you, son. I'm here. Your daddy's here." "What's his name?" Rosa asked softly, adjusting the oxygen tube near the baby's face. "Ethan," Marcus said, the name Victoria had chosen feeling sacred on his tongue. "Ethan Marcus Whitfield." "Ethan," Rosa repeated, her weathered hand gentle on the baby's back. "Strong name. Fighter's name." For the next 40 minutes, Marcus stood frozen in place, feeling every breath his son took, whispering promises and apologies and prayers. Rosa moved between the twins with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon, adjusting oxygen levels, monitoring their color, performing mysterious manipulations that seemed to coax life back into their tiny bodies minute by minute. The storm raged outside, but inside the dining room, time became meaningless. There was only breath and heartbeat, the soft glow of space heaters, and Rosa's steady voice guiding Marcus through each crisis. "His lips are turning blue again," Marcus said, panic rising. "Rub his back, firmly, like this," Rosa demonstrated on Emma. "Wake him up. He needs to remember to breathe." It was insane. It was impossible. But it was working. When headlights finally pierced the storm, Dr. Chen arriving in a massive National Guard snow vehicle, both babies were breathing regularly, their color good, their vital signs stable enough that Chen stood in the doorway and simply stared. "How?" he asked Rosa, setting down his medical bag with shaking hands. Rosa looked up from Emma, her face exhausted but peaceful. "I remembered," she said simply. "After 19 years, I remembered everything." But what Marcus didn't know, what he wouldn't discover until days later when he finally looked at the baby's hospital records, was that Rosa had done more than remember. She'd performed procedures that required certifications, equipment, and expertise far beyond what any housekeeper should possess. She'd done things that should have been impossible. And when Dr. Chen examined the twins that night, he found something else. Something that made him go very still and look at Rosa with new, troubled eyes. "Mrs. Martinez," he said carefully, "these babies have a very rare birthmark pattern. It's called a sacral dimple configuration, extremely uncommon. showing up in maybe 1 in 50,000 births. I've only seen it twice in my career." He paused, weighing his words. "The last time was 27 years ago, in a medical journal article about a breakthrough in premature infant care. The nurse who developed the technique had the same birthmark. Her name was Rosa Martinez Whitfield." The room went silent except for the soft hiss of oxygen and the howl of wind against windows. Marcus looked at Rosa, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes before she spoke. "I think," Rosa said quietly, her hand trembling as it rested on Emma's tiny back, "it's time I told you about your father, Marcus, and why I came to work in this house 19 years ago." 03. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. "My father?" "Rosa, my father died when I was 19. He had a heart attack in his office. I don't understand what—" "Sit down, Mr. Whitfield." Dr. Chen's voice had shifted into his clinical mode, the one he used when delivering serious diagnoses. "I think you should sit down for this." But Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Ethan stirred against his chest, making a small mewling sound, and Marcus automatically rubbed his son's back, the motion Rosa had taught him now instinctive. His mind raced through memories of his father, stern, distant Robert Whitfield Sr., the self-made billionaire who'd built Whitfield Industries from nothing, who'd demanded perfection and accepted nothing less. "Rosa," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "tell me." Rosa lifted Emma from the towels, cradling her close. The baby's breathing had stabilized, her tiny fist curling around Rosa's finger with surprising strength. Rosa's eyes, when she finally met Marcus's gaze, were bright with unshed tears. "I met your father in 1998, she began, her accent thicker now, as if the memories carried her back to her younger self. "I was working at Hospital Civil in Guadalajara, head of the NICU. We had a medical conference and American doctors came to learn our techniques for caring for premature babies in, resource-limited settings. Your father was there, not as a doctor, but as a donor. Whitfield Industries had just opened a pharmaceutical plant in Mexico, and he came to tour the facilities we would benefit from his foundation's work." Marcus remembered that trip. He'd been 11 years old, and his father had been gone for 3 weeks. His mother had been angry when Robert Sr. returned, angrier than Marcus had ever seen her. "We fell in love." Rosa's voice broke slightly. "I know how it sounds, the wealthy American businessman and the Mexican nurse, but it wasn't like that, Marcus. Your father, he saw me. He valued my work, my mind. For 6 months he came back to Guadalajara every few weeks. We talked about medicine, about helping people, about building programs that would save babies who couldn't afford fancy American hospitals. He was married," Marcus said flatly. "He was married to my mother." "Yes." Rosa didn't flinch from the truth, and I knew it. I knew it was wrong, but I was young and foolish and so very much in love. When I became pregnant, the words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Pregnant. Your father wanted me to come to Boston. He said he would divorce your mother, that we would be together. But I wouldn't do that to a family, to you. You were just a boy, so I made him promise to stay with your mother, to be the father you needed." "And I—" She looked down at Emma, her tears finally falling. "I lost the baby at 20 weeks. A little girl. I named her Emma." Marcus's legs gave out. He sank into one of the dining room chairs, still clutching Ethan to his chest. "You named your daughter Emma, and my wife wanted to name our daughter." He couldn't finish. "I know." Rosa's voice was barely audible. "When Mrs. Victoria told me the names she'd chosen, I had to leave the room. The universe, it has strange ways." Dr. Chen cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Martinez, the birthmark pattern I mentioned, it runs in families," Rosa said. "Your father had it, Marcus. That's how I knew when I saw these babies. They carry the Whitfield mark, but they also carry something else." She shifted Emma slightly, revealing a small, distinctive marking at the base of the baby's spine. "This exact pattern. I have it too, and my daughter would have had it. It's genetic, Marcus. It passes through both maternal and paternal lines, but only when certain genetic markers align." Marcus felt like he was drowning in information he couldn't process. "You're saying your family? That you're related to us somehow?" "I'm saying," Rosa said carefully, "that your father came back to Guadalajara 8 months after I lost the baby. He told me he'd done research, looked into his family history. The Whitfield mark wasn't just a birthmark, it was a genetic signature that appeared in a very specific bloodline. And he'd found records, Marcus, old records from when his father emigrated from Ireland to America in the 1920s. Your grandfather had a brother, a twin, who stayed in Ireland. That brother married a woman from a family that had emigrated from Ireland to Mexico decades before. The implications crashed over Marcus like a wave. You're saying we're cousins? That you and my father? Distant cousins. Fourth, maybe fifth generation. The genetics were distant enough that it wasn't... Rosa struggled for words. It wasn't wrong in that way, but it explained the birthmark, the connection. Your father was obsessed with understanding it. He spent months researching our family trees, trying to map out the bloodlines. And then? Marcus demanded. What happened then? He died. Rosa's voice went flat. 2 months after he told me what he'd discovered. His heart attack. It wasn't... Marcus, your father was only 47 years old, in perfect health. He died in his office, alone, on a Sunday morning when no one else was in the building. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes, but I always wondered... Stop. Marcus held up his hand, his mind reeling. Just stop. This is insane. You're telling me that my father, that you, and now my children have some genetic marker that proves... What exactly? That I'm family, Rosa said simply. That I came to work in this house 19 years ago because I couldn't stay away. I needed to see you grow up, to watch over you the way I couldn't watch over my own child. Your mother, she never knew about me and your father. I made sure of that. I was just the housekeeper, quiet, forgettable, but I was here, Marcus. I was always here. Ethan whimpered against Marcus's chest, and Emma began to fuss in Rosa's arms. The babies, unaware of the earth-shattering revelations swirling around them, were simply hungry and tired, and in need of care. Dr. Chen stepped forward, his medical bag open. Whatever the family history, he said firmly, these babies need to be transferred to Children's Hospital as soon as the roads are clear. They're stable now, but they need proper NICU care, monitoring, feeding support. Mrs. Martinez, what you did tonight, it was extraordinary. You saved their lives, but they're not out of danger yet. Rosa nodded, her professionalism sliding back into place. I know. I'll prepare bottles. There's formula in the kitchen that Mrs. Victoria bought last week. They'll need to eat soon, small amounts, frequently. And we need to keep them warm, keep monitoring their breathing. How long until we can transport? The National Guard says 3 hours minimum, Dr. Chen replied. The snow is starting to let up, but the roads need clearing first. 3 hours. Marcus looked at his son, then at his daughter in Rosa's arms, then at the woman who had just turned his entire understanding of his family upside down. Rosa, he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. If what you're saying is true, if you really are family, why didn't you tell me? 19 years, Rosa. 19 years you've worked here, and you never said a word. Rosa met his eyes, and in them, he saw decades of grief, love, sacrifice, and secrets. Because it wasn't my place, Marcus. Your father made me promise never to tell your mother, never to disrupt the family he'd built. And after he died, I thought, what good would it do? You had your life, your mother, your inheritance. What could I offer except pain and questions? But tonight, these babies needed me. Rosa's voice strengthened. Tonight, I could give them what I couldn't give my own daughter, a chance at life. And maybe, she looked down at Emma, her weathered face soft with love. Maybe that's why I was meant to be here. Maybe that's what your father wanted all along. For me to protect his grandchildren, the way I couldn't protect our child. The storm outside was dying, its fury spent. In the warm glow of the dining room, 2 tiny babies breathed steadily, their lives saved by a woman whose connection to them was written in their very DNA. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Because now he had questions. Questions about his father's death, about the family secrets that had been buried for decades, about what other truths were hidden in the Whitfield history. And looking at Rosa, this woman who'd been invisible in his house for 19 years, who'd just revealed herself to be his father's lover, his distant cousin, and his children's savior, Marcus realized he'd been blind to so much more than he could have imagined. The secrets were only beginning to surface, and what lay beneath might change everything he thought he knew about the Whitfield family forever. The next 72 hours blurred into an exhausting cycle of hospital visits, legal consultations, and sleepless nights. Ethan and Emma were transferred to Children's Hospital, where they spent 2 weeks in the NICU, their tiny bodies growing stronger each day. Marcus practically lived in the hospital, his business empire running on autopilot while he learned to change diapers smaller than his hand and hold bottles that looked like doll accessories. Rosa came every day, though she maintained her professional distance in public. The nurses treated her with special deference once they learned of her NICU background. asking her opinions, seeking her guidance. Marcus watched her transform from invisible housekeeper to respected medical professional, and each transformation felt like an indictment of his own blindness. On the morning of Victoria's funeral, Marcus stood in his bedroom, their bedroom, staring at the black suit laid out on the bed. He'd barely slept in this room since that terrible night. The space still smelled like Victoria's perfume, and her robe hung on the bathroom door where she'd left it, as if she might walk in at any moment and ask him to zip up her dress. A soft knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Rosa stood in the doorway, dressed in a simple black dress he'd never seen before, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Mr. Whitfield," she said quietly, "the cars will be here in an hour. I've prepared breakfast downstairs, though I know you won't eat it. But you should try." Marcus turned away from the suit. "Rosa, we need to talk about what you told me, about my father, about everything." "Today is not the day," Rosa said firmly. "Today you bury your wife and say goodbye to the mother of your children. The past can wait." "Can it?" Marcus's voice rose despite himself. "You drop a bomb on me about my father having an affair, about you being some long-lost relative, about genetic markers and suspicious deaths, and then you expect me to just, what, pretend everything is normal?" Rosa stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I expect you to grieve, Marcus. I expect you to honor Victoria's memory. And yes, I expect you to put your children first, because that's what parents do. The truth about your father, about me, it's waited 19 years. It can wait another few days. Did you kill him?" The question burst out before Marcus could stop it. "My father. You said his death was suspicious. Were you—" The slap came so fast Marcus barely registered it before his cheek was stinging. Rosa's hand trembled in the air between them, her eyes blazing with fury and grief. "How dare you?" she whispered. "I loved your father with everything I had. When he died, I wanted to die with him. I came to this house because it was all I had left of him. You were all I had left of him. I have spent 19 years watching you grow up, watching you build the empire he started, watching you become the man he always hoped you'd be. And you think I could have hurt him?" Marcus touched his burning cheek, shame flooding through him. "I'm sorry." "I'm sorry, Rosa. I don't know what I'm saying. I haven't slept in 3 days. My wife is dead. My children were almost—" His voice broke. "I don't know how to do this. Any of this." Rosa's anger melted into compassion. She reached up and gently touched his face where she'd struck it. "You do it one moment at a time, Marcus. You get dressed. You go to the funeral. You let people offer their meaningless condolences. You come home. You hold your babies. And tomorrow, you do it again. That's how you survive grief, one breath at a time." The funeral was a blur of faces and voices. Victoria's parents, cold, distant people who'd never approved of Marcus, sat in the front pew with expressions of accusatory grief, as if Marcus had personally killed their daughter by getting her pregnant. His own mother, Patricia Whitfield, sat ramrod straight beside him, her face a mask of aristocratic composure that revealed nothing. Rosa sat in the back, unnoticed among the household staff and distant relatives, but Marcus found himself looking for her throughout the service, anchoring himself with her steady presence. At the cemetery, as Victoria's casket was lowered into the frozen ground, Marcus felt something inside him crack open. He'd loved Victoria, not with passionate intensity perhaps, but with genuine affection and partnership. They'd built a life together, made plans, created 2 perfect children, and now she was gone, leaving him alone with mysteries and secrets, and a woman he'd overlooked for 19 years who might hold the key to his family's darkest truths. Back at the mansion, guests milled through the rooms, eating catered food and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. Marcus escaped to his study, locking the door behind him, seeking refuge in the one space that felt entirely his own. He didn't expect to find someone already there. Patricia Whitfield sat in his leather chair, a thick manila folder open on the desk before her. She looked up as Marcus entered, her blue eyes, so like his own, cold and assessing. "Mother," Marcus said, surprise making his voice sharp. "What are you doing in here?" "Looking for answers," Patricia replied calmly. She gestured to the folder. "Sit down, Marcus. We need to talk about Rosa Martinez." Marcus felt ice crystallize in his veins. "What about her?" "Don't play games with me." Patricia's voice could have cut glass. "I've known about Rosa for 19 years. Did you really think I was so blind? That I didn't notice when your father brought his Mexican mistress into our home, installed her as our housekeeper, Paid her 3 times the going rate? Marcus sank into the chair opposite the desk, his mother's words hitting him like hammer blows. You knew? All this time you knew? Of course I knew. Patricia laughed, a bitter sound. What I didn't know was why. Why Robert insisted on keeping her close. Why he paid for her American citizenship, set up trust funds in her name, visited her quarters late at night when he thought I was asleep. She pushed the folder across the desk. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I hired investigators. Marcus opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photographs. His father and Rosa in Mexico, sitting at a cafe, their hands intertwined. Hospital records showing Rosa's lost pregnancy. Birth certificates and family trees mapping out the complex genetic connection Rosa had described. And finally, medical records from the day of his father's death. Page 17, Patricia said quietly. The toxicology report. Marcus flipped to the page, his eyes scanning technical medical jargon until one phrase leaped out. Traces of digoxin found at levels inconsistent with prescribed dosage. Possible accidental or intentional overdose cannot be ruled out. Digoxin, Marcus read aloud. That's a heart medication. That your father wasn't prescribed, Patricia said. The medical examiner ruled it natural causes because Robert's heart showed signs of cardiac disease. But Marcus, your father was training for a marathon. He had the heart of a man 20 years younger. The digoxin killed him. Induced cardiac arrest in someone whose heart was perfectly healthy. Marcus's mind reeled. But who would? Rosa said she loved him. She wouldn't. I don't think it was Rosa. Patricia's voice was tight. I think it was me. The world stopped. Patricia stood, walking to the window that overlooked the snow-covered gardens. I was so angry, Marcus. Angry at Robert for his affair. Angry at myself for tolerating it. Angry at Rosa for existing. I had sleeping pills prescribed, or so I thought. But when I went through my medicine cabinet after Robert died, I found digoxin tablets where my sleeping pills should have been. The bottles had been switched. Mother, what are you saying? I'm saying someone set me up to kill my husband. Patricia turned, and for the first time in his life, Marcus saw fear in his mother's eyes. I kept the bottles, hid them, told no one. I was terrified I'd be arrested for murder. But over the years, I've come to realize someone very clever wanted Robert dead and wanted me to take the fall. Someone who had access to our home, our medicine cabinets, our lives. Marcus thought of Rosa's revelation about his father's research into their family connection, about the genetic markers, about secrets that went back generations. Who? That's what I've spent 19 years trying to discover. Patricia returned to the desk, pulling out another document. 2 weeks before Robert died, he changed his will. Left $50 million in a trust for Rosa Martinez. But the trust had a condition. It could only be accessed if she remained employed in the Whitfield household for a minimum of 20 years. 20 years. Rosa had been with them for 19. She's 1 year away from claiming $50 million, Patricia said. 1 year away from financial independence. And now, suddenly, your children, Robert's grandchildren, develop this same rare genetic marker that connects her to our family. Marcus, don't you find the timing suspicious? Marcus's head throbbed. You think Rosa is planning something? That she's waited 19 years for what? I don't know. Patricia's composure finally cracked. But your father was killed, Marcus. Someone murdered him and made it look like natural causes or like I was responsible. And the only person who benefits from staying in this house, who has medical knowledge and access to medications, who has a genetic connection to our family that we only just discovered, is the woman who saved my children's lives. Marcus finished flatly. Mother, Rosa performed medical miracles. She kept Ethan and Emma alive when they should have died. You're telling me she's some kind of long-game murderer who spent 19 years waiting to what? Kill me too? Inherit through my children? I'm telling you to be careful. Patricia closed the folder. I'm telling you that nothing about Rosa Martinez is what it seems. And I'm telling you that tomorrow, I'm hiring new investigators to find out what really happened to your father. Because, Marcus, I loved Robert despite everything, and I won't let his murderer stay in this house 1 day longer than necessary. She swept out of the study, leaving Marcus alone with the folder and his spiraling thoughts. He looked at the photographs of his father and Rosa, young and in love, and tried to reconcile that image with the one his mother had painted, of a calculating woman playing a decades-long game. His phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Ethan and Emma ready for discharge tomorrow. Congratulations, Dad. Tomorrow. His children were coming home. And waiting for them would be Rosa. Savior or threat, family or fraud, the woman who held all the answers or the one spinning all the lies. Marcus knew what he had to do. Tonight, while guests still filled the house, while his mother's accusations were fresh, he would confront Rosa one final time. He would demand the truth, all of it, and he would know, once and for all, whether to trust the woman who'd saved his children or fear the one who might have killed his father. The snow had stopped falling, but the storm inside Whitfield Manor was only beginning. Marcus found Rosa in the kitchen at midnight, long after the last funeral guest had departed. She stood at the industrial sink, washing china by hand despite the presence of 2 dishwashers, her movements methodical and meditative. She didn't turn when Marcus entered, but her shoulders tensed and he knew she'd been expecting this confrontation. "My mother told me about the will," Marcus said without preamble. $50 million if you stay 20 years. You're 1 year away, Rosa. Rosa's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Yes." "She also told me about the digoxin, about how my father was murdered." "Yes." "Did you kill him?" Marcus's voice was steady, clinical. He'd spent the last 3 hours examining his feelings, his fears, his memories. Now he needed facts. Rosa finally turned, drying her hands on a towel. Her face was drawn, exhausted, but her eyes were clear. "No, Marcus, I did not kill your father, but I know who did." The admission hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Tell me," Marcus said. "Sit." Rosa gestured to the kitchen table where, Marcus suddenly remembered, he'd eaten breakfast every morning of his childhood, where Rosa had served him cereal and juice and asked about his homework in her quiet, forgettable way. "This will take time." Marcus sat. Rosa poured 2 glasses of brandy, expensive brandy from his private stock that housekeepers weren't supposed to touch, and settled across from him. "Your father was killed by his business partner," Rosa began. "Thomas Ashford. Do you remember him?" Marcus's blood ran cold. Thomas Ashford, Uncle Tommy, as Marcus had called him growing up. His father's college roommate, co-founder of Whitfield Industries, the man who'd sold his shares back to Robert Sr. 5 years after the company went public, walking away with billions. Marcus hadn't seen Tommy in years. The man had retired to Monaco and cut all ties with the family. Tommy wouldn't. They were best friends. They were competitors. Rosa sipped her brandy. "Your father never told you the real story of Whitfield Industries, did he? How it truly began?" Marcus shook his head, feeling like a child again, ignorant of the adult world swirling around him. "The pharmaceutical research that made your father billions. The breakthrough cancer medication that became Whitfield Industries' flagship product. It wasn't your father's discovery." Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. "It was Thomas Ashford's. Tommy spent 7 years in the lab developing the compound. He was the genius, Marcus. Your father was the businessman, the one who knew how to get funding, navigate FDA approvals, market the drug. They were partners. 50-50. So what happened? Your father fell in love with me." Rosa's smile was sad. "And I got pregnant. Tommy, he was furious. Not because of the affair itself, but because your father wanted to restructure the company to provide funding for medical programs in developing countries. Programs that would give away Whitfield Industries medications for free to people who couldn't afford them. Your father called it ethical capitalism. Tommy called it financial suicide." Marcus began to see the shape of the betrayal. "And when you lost the baby, your father became obsessed with making something good come from our tragedy. He wanted to build NICU centers across Mexico, Central America, anywhere poor children were dying for lack of basic medical care. He told Tommy he was restructuring the company to fund it, that he'd use his majority shares to force the change if necessary. But Tommy had 50%, Marcus said. They were equal partners." "Not quite." Rosa pulled a document from her apron pocket. She'd been carrying it, Marcus realized, waiting for this moment. 6 months before your father died, I signed over power of attorney to him. Medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, everything. Your father told me it was for my protection, in case anything happened to me. But it also meant he controlled the trust fund he'd set up in my name. A trust fund worth 2% of Whitfield Industries. Marcus understood immediately. That gave him 52%, controlling interest. Tommy found out the day before your father died. I know because your father called me from his office that morning. He was worried. He said Tommy had threatened him, said things would get ugly. Your father told me if anything happened to him, I should take the documents he'd hidden in his office and go to the police. But, Rosa's voice broke. When I arrived at the mansion that day, your mother met me at the door. She told me Robert was dead, that I should go home, that my services were no longer needed. But you didn't leave. I couldn't. Rosa wiped her eyes. I went to your father's office that night, broke in through a window. The documents were gone, Marcus. Everything. His research into our family connection, his plans for the medical centers, his evidence of Tommy's threats, all of it had been cleaned out. And in the medicine cabinet in his private bathroom, I found a bottle of digoxin with Tommy's fingerprints on it. Marcus felt the room spin. You found evidence and didn't go to the police? I tried! Rosa's composure finally shattered. I called the detective handling the case, but when I went back to get the bottle, it was gone. And 2 days later, your mother offered me a job as permanent housekeeper. She told me she knew about the affair, knew about the baby, and knew I needed money and stability. She said if I stayed quiet, worked hard, and never caused trouble, she'd make sure I was taken care of. The alternative, she implied, was having my visa revoked and being deported. The cruelty of it made Marcus sick. His mother had trapped Rosa in grief and silence, had forced her to live in the home of the man she loved, serving the family she could never truly join. So you stayed, Marcus whispered. I stayed because it was the only way to keep your father's dream alive. Rosa stood, walking to a locked drawer in the kitchen desk. She produced a key from around her neck and opened it, revealing stacks of documents. For 19 years, Marcus, I have been documenting everything. Every financial irregularity in Whitfield Industries. Every connection between Tommy Ashford and your mother's family. Every piece of evidence I could gather without raising suspicion. And in 2 months, when I've completed my 20 years and can access the trust your father left me, I was going to hire the best lawyers in the country and finally get justice for Robert. She spread the documents across the kitchen table. Marcus stared at decades of meticulous investigation, bank transfers, corporate emails, medical records, witness statements, photographs. It was overwhelming, comprehensive, damning. But there's more, Rosa said quietly. Something I discovered 3 days ago, when the hospital sent me the twins' genetic profiles. She pulled out a final document, the genetic test results for Ethan and Emma. Marcus scanned the technical language, not understanding what he was seeing. Your children have the Whitfield genetic marker, Rosa explained. But they also have something else, a genetic mutation that's extremely rare, showing up in less than 1% of the population. It's called hyperthymesia, the ability to remember everything, every moment, in perfect detail. It doesn't manifest until early childhood, usually around age 4 or 5. But Marcus, she looked at him with eyes full of wonder and fear. Your father had it, I have it, and now your children have it. Marcus struggled to process this new information. What does that mean? It means they'll never forget anything. Every conversation, every face, every experience, it will all be stored in perfect clarity. Your father used to say it was both gift and curse. He could remember every business deal, every contract, every conversation. That's how he built Whitfield Industries. His memory was his superpower. But he also remembered every pain, every loss, every moment of suffering with perfect, inescapable clarity. Marcus thought of his children, still so tiny, so fragile. The idea that they would grow up carrying every memory, unable to forget or blur painful experiences, was both miraculous and terrifying. My daughter would have had it too, Rosa said softly. Emma, my Emma, she would have remembered everything, even being loved by parents who could never truly be together. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking over Boston, painting the snow-covered grounds in shades of pink and gold. What do you want me to do? Marcus finally asked. With all this evidence, these documents, what do you need from me? Rosa gathered the papers, returning them to their drawer. I need you to trust me for 1 more year. Let me finish what your father started. And when the time comes, when I can finally act without fear of deportation or retaliation, I need you to stand with me, to help me expose Tommy Ashford and, she paused, the hardest words still unspoken, and my mother. Marcus finished. She knew. She helped cover it up. I believe she was protecting you, Rosa said gently, in her own twisted way. She couldn't prove Tommy had killed Robert, but she could make sure you inherited everything, that you'd be safe. So she made a deal. She'd keep quiet about the murder if Tommy disappeared and never touched Whitfield Industries or the family again. And she'd keep me close, under her control, unable to cause trouble. Marcus stood, his entire worldview shattered and reforming into something new, something clearer. Tomorrow Ethan and Emma come home. And Rosa, he met her eyes. You're not the housekeeper anymore. You're my children's grandmother. Your family, real family. and we're going to finish what my father started. Together. Rosa's composure finally broke completely. She wept, and Marcus held her. This woman who'd been invisible in his house for 19 years, who'd saved his children and solved his father's murder, and carried the weight of impossible secrets. "Thank you," she whispered. "Robert would be so proud of the man you've become." But Marcus knew the hardest part was still ahead, because in 3 hours his mother would arrive for breakfast, and he would have to look Patricia Whitfield in the eye and decide, was she accomplice to murder, or just a mother protecting her child? And either way, could he ever forgive her? The sun rose over Whitfield Manor, illuminating truths that had lived in darkness for too long. The storm had passed, but its aftermath would reshape everything Marcus thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the price of secrets. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the nursery he'd designed with Victoria, watching his children sleep. Ethan and Emma, now healthy and thriving, lay in matching cribs, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. At 3 months old, they were meeting every developmental milestone, their eyes bright and alert, their grasps strong, their smiles, when they came, capable of lighting up the darkest room. Rosa entered quietly, carrying bottles for the midnight feeding. She'd moved into the mansion's guest wing, no longer relegated to the staff quarters. The change had caused ripples through the household. Some staff members welcomed it, others whispered in corners about propriety and tradition. Marcus didn't care. His children needed their grandmother, and he needed Rosa's strength as he navigated the treacherous waters ahead. "They're perfect," Rosa whispered, setting down the bottles. "Every day they get stronger, smarter. Yesterday, Emma tracked my voice across the entire room. And Ethan," she smiled, "he recognized your footsteps coming down the hall." 3 months old and already remembering patterns. The hyperthymesia, the gift, or curse, of perfect memory. It wouldn't fully manifest for years, but Marcus already saw hints of it in how his children fixated on faces, how they seemed to study everything with unusual intensity. "Rosa," Marcus said, "tomorrow is the 20th anniversary. Your trust becomes accessible at midnight." Rosa nodded, her expression calm. "I know. I've already retained the legal team. The documents are prepared. By Friday, Thomas Ashford will be served with papers for wrongful death, fraud, and murder. The Swiss authorities have agreed to cooperate with the investigation." "And my mother?" Marcus couldn't keep the pain from his voice. They'd barely spoken in 3 months. Patricia had retreated to the family's estate in the Hamptons, claiming she needed time away from the city. But Marcus knew the truth. She was preparing for the reckoning she knew was coming. "That's your decision," Rosa said gently. "I have no evidence she participated in the murder itself. The cover-up, yes, she obstructed justice, destroyed evidence, coerced my silence. But Marcus, she did it believing she was protecting you. A good lawyer could argue she was a victim too, manipulated by Tommy Ashford, frightened into compliance. Or she was complicit in killing my father to maintain control of the company." Marcus's voice was flat. "Either way, she let his murderer walk free. She trapped you in servitude. He stopped, unable to articulate the full scope of his mother's betrayal. Emma stirred in her crib, making soft, cooing sounds. Rosa lifted her, and Marcus took Ethan, and they settled into the rocking chairs Victoria had chosen. Back when the world was simpler, when secrets were still buried, when death hadn't yet shattered everything. "There's something else," Rosa said as Emma nursed her bottle. "Something I need to tell you before tomorrow, before everything becomes public." Marcus felt dread pool in his stomach. "What now?" "Your father's will, the one that established my trust. It had another provision, one that your mother and Tommy both knew about but never executed." Rosa's hand trembled slightly as she supported Emma's head. "If I completed the 20 years of service, and if I could prove Robert was murdered, then 51% of Whitfield Industries' shares, the controlling interest your father held, would transfer to me. Not to you, Marcus. To me." The world stopped. "He wanted me to have the power to finish his work," Rosa continued quickly, seeing Marcus's shock. "The medical centers, the free clinics, the programs for premature babies in poor countries, all of it required controlling interest in the company to implement. Your father knew Tommy would fight every charitable initiative, that the board would prioritize profits over people. So he gave me the weapon to force change." Marcus couldn't breathe. His entire inheritance, his control of the empire his father built, all of it hung on Rosa's word, on a legal provision he'd never known existed. "But," Rosa said softly, The will also included an alternative clause. If the heir, you, Marcus, agreed to implement Robert's vision voluntarily to restructure Whitfield Industries into a force for genuine good rather than just profit, then the controlling shares would pass to you as originally intended. You would keep your inheritance, your company, your legacy. All you have to do is honor your father's dream. Marcus looked at his son sleeping peacefully in his arms. Ethan Marcus Whitfield, carrier of the genetic marker that connected 3 generations, blessed and burdened with the ability to remember everything. What kind of world did Marcus want his son to remember? What legacy did he want to build? How much? Marcus asked. How much would it cost to implement everything my father wanted? Rosa pulled out a tablet. She'd become surprisingly tech-savvy in recent months and displayed a comprehensive financial plan. $3 billion over 10 years. NICU centers in 20 countries. Training programs for local medical staff. Free medication distribution. Partnerships with existing hospitals and clinics. It's ambitious, Marcus. It would reduce Whitfield Industries' profit margins by approximately 40%. $3 billion. Marcus did the math. His personal fortune was $8 billion. He could fund the entire program himself without touching the company. But that wasn't the point. The point was transforming Whitfield Industries into what his father had envisioned, a company that prioritized human life over shareholder returns. The board will fight me, Marcus said. Probably. Investors will revolt. Some will. Others will see the PR value, the long-term brand building. My mother will think I'm insane. Rosa smiled. She already does. Marcus looked around the nursery, at the expensive furniture, the designer wallpaper, the crystal mobile tinkling over Emma's crib. All of it bought with Whitfield money, built on the pharmaceutical empire his father created. How much of it was stained with the blood of people who died because they couldn't afford the medications that could have saved them? Do it, Marcus said. All of it. The legal action against Tommy Ashford, the restructuring of Whitfield Industries, the medical centers, everything. I'll announce it tomorrow at the board meeting. And Rosa, he met her eyes, I want your name on the buildings. The Rosa Martinez Whitfield Centers for Neonatal Care. You saved my children, and you've spent 20 years honoring my father's memory. It's time the world knew your name. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, you don't have to. I want to. Marcus stood, gently placing Ethan back in his crib. My father loved you. He trusted you with his greatest dreams. And you gave up everything to protect those dreams, to protect me, to protect his grandchildren. You're not the housekeeper, Rosa. You're not even just family. You're the keeper of my father's legacy, and I'm honored to help you fulfill it. They stood together in the quiet nursery, 2 people connected by tragedy and blood and impossible circumstances, watching over the children who represented hope and healing and the possibility of breaking cycles of pain. Tomorrow will be difficult, Rosa warned. Tommy will fight. The media will be brutal. Your mother, I don't know what she'll do. Tomorrow, Marcus said firmly, we tell the truth, all of it, and then we build something better. The next morning, Marcus called an emergency board meeting. The conference room at Whitfield Industries, the same room where his father had died 19 years ago, filled with suspicious executives and nervous investors. Patricia Whitfield sat in the back, her face unreadable, her presence a silent challenge. Marcus stood at the head of the table, Rosa beside him, and told them everything. About his father's affair and the lost baby. About the genetic connection spanning generations. About Thomas Ashford's murder of Robert Whitfield Sr. and the decades-long cover-up. About Rosa's investigation and the evidence she'd meticulously gathered. And finally, about his decision to transform Whitfield Industries into the force for good his father had always envisioned. The room erupted. Accusations flew. 3 board members walked out immediately. Someone threatened legal action. But Marcus stood firm, Rosa's steady presence anchoring him, and when he finished presenting the financial projections, showing how ethical capitalism could actually increase long-term profitability while saving lives, a few faces began to show grudging interest. Patricia remained silent throughout. Only at the end, when the meeting dissolved into chaos and Marcus was surrounded by journalists and lawyers and people demanding answers, did she approach. You're destroying everything, Patricia said coldly. Your father built this company to provide for our family, and you're dismantling his legacy for some romantic notion of charity. I'm fulfilling his legacy, Marcus countered. The real one, not the sanitized version you wanted me to inherit. Patricia's mask cracked slightly. I protected you. You betrayed him. You let his murderer go free. I kept you safe. Patricia's voice rose. Tommy Ashford threatened you, Marcus. He said if I pursued the investigation, if I caused problems, he'd make sure you had an accident just like your father. So yes, I made a deal. I let a murderer walk if it meant keeping my son alive. If that makes me a monster, so be it. But you're alive because of the choices I made. The admission hung between them, and Marcus saw his mother clearly for the first time, not as villain or hero, but as a flawed human being who'd made impossible choices in impossible circumstances. She'd done terrible things for what she believed were noble reasons. She'd sacrificed justice for safety, truth for protection. I understand, Marcus said quietly, but understanding doesn't mean forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Patricia nodded stiffly, her composure returning. I'm resigning from the board effective immediately. I'll cooperate with the investigation into Tommy's actions, but I won't be part of this. She gestured dismissively at the chaos. This circus. She walked away, spine straight, pride intact, and Marcus wondered if he'd just lost his mother forever. But then Rosa's hand found his, squeezing gently, and he remembered, family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was the people who showed up, who stayed, who sacrificed for something bigger than themselves. 6 months later, Marcus stood on a hillside in Oaxaca, Mexico, watching as the first Rosa Martinez Whitfield Center for Neonatal Care opened its doors. The building was beautiful. Modern medical equipment housed in architecture that honored local traditions, staffed by a mix of American specialists and locally trained doctors and nurses. Rosa stood beside him, holding Emma, while Marcus carried Ethan. The twins were 9 months old now, babbling and laughing, reaching for everything with insatiable curiosity. Already they showed signs of the remarkable memory they'd inherited. Ethan could recognize faces after seeing them just once, and Emma's ability to track patterns and sequences was extraordinary. Your father would have loved this, Rosa said softly, watching as the first patients, tiny premature babies born to families who could never have afforded this level of care, were carried inside by tearful, grateful parents. He'd have loved them, Marcus replied, bouncing Ethan gently. His grandchildren. The next generation to carry the Whitfield legacy forward. Thomas Ashford was in custody in Monaco, facing extradition to the United States on murder charges. The investigation had uncovered a web of corruption spanning decades, implicating dozens of people in cover-ups and conspiracies. Patricia had testified against him, a form of penance, perhaps, or simply the calculation of a woman protecting herself. Either way, justice was finally being served, and Whitfield Industries, despite the predictions of doom, was thriving. The company's commitment to ethical practices had attracted new investors, younger consumers, and global praise. Profit margins had dipped initially, but were recovering faster than projected. Marcus had proven that doing good and doing well weren't mutually exclusive. Do you think they'll remember this? Marcus asked, looking at his children. When the hyperthymesia fully develops, will they remember standing here, this moment, this victory? Rosa smiled. They'll remember everything, Marcus. The good and the bad, the beautiful and the painful. That's the gift and the curse. But if we fill their lives with moments like this, with love and justice and the knowledge that they're part of something bigger than themselves, then what they remember will be beautiful. As the sun set over the Mexican mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Peace, purpose, the bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Victoria would never see this. She'd never know how her death had catalyzed a revolution, how her children would grow up in a world their grandmother helped reshape. But Marcus liked to think she'd approve. She'd always been the one pushing him to be better, to think bigger, to consider the impact of their wealth and privilege. Rosa began to sing softly, a Mexican lullaby Marcus didn't recognize but found inexplicably comforting. Emma's eyes drifted closed, and Ethan's head settled against Marcus's chest, his small hand clutching his father's shirt. Thank you, Marcus said to Rosa, for everything, for saving them, for waiting all those years, for believing my father's dream was worth fighting for. Thank you, Rosa replied, for letting me be part of their lives, for giving me the family I thought I'd lost forever. They walked back to the car as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, two people bound by tragedy and genetics, and the fierce love of children who would remember everything. Behind them, the lights of the medical center blazed against the night, a beacon of hope, a promise kept, A legacy finally fulfilled. Marcus Whitfield had inherited billions, but his true inheritance was this: the knowledge that redemption was possible, that love could transcend death, and that sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we overlook until crisis forces us to finally see them. The babies who'd almost died in a blizzard were alive and thriving. The woman everyone had overlooked had saved them all, and from the ashes of grief and betrayal, something beautiful had been born. That, Marcus thought, was a legacy worth remembering, even if you could never forget. Compartilhar artefatos, baixar, tudo Miracle Babies. Chapters 1. 3 documento. MD, conteúdo do projeto Guar. 7. Unificado Inglês. Menor criado por você adicione PDFs, documentos ou outros textos para usar como referência neste projeto.